The Galactic Military Academy's training grounds hummed with the usual morning activity. Cadets from 47 different species moved through their drills under the watchful eyes of their instructors. Among them, Private Jake Morrison stood out, not because he was exceptional, but because he was human. Earth had only joined the Galactic Coalition 3 years ago, and humans were still regarded as curiosities. Deathworlders, they called them. Survivors from a planet so hostile that it had forged its inhabitants into something the galaxy had rarely seen, adaptable, resilient, and disturbingly difficult to kill. Jake didn't think of himself as special. He was just a kid from Colorado who'd enlisted to see the stars. At 22, he was lean, athletic, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up wrestling with his brothers and playing contact sports. Nothing about him screamed dangerous. That was his advantage. Sergeant Kralvex was a Thoraxian, 8 feet of chitinous armor, 4 arms, and a disposition that made drill sergeants across Earth look like kindergarten teachers. His species had dominated galactic military forces for 2 centuries, and he wore his superiority like a second skin. Pathetic. Kralvex's voice boomed across the training mat. You soft species cadets wouldn't last 5 minutes in real combat. Your bones are brittle, your reflexes slow, your endurance laughable. The other cadets, a mix of Valkyrie, Carwinen, and Sisteran recruits, nodded nervously. They'd learned not to argue with Thoraxians. The insectoid warriors had conquered 12 systems before joining the coalition. Respect wasn't requested, it was demanded. Jake kept his expression neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Kralvex noticed. He always noticed. You disagree, human? No, Sergeant, Jake replied evenly. No. Kralvex clicked his mandibles, a Thoraxian laugh. Your species thinks it's special because you survived on a Class 12 death world. Let me tell you something, cadet, predators don't make good soldiers. Discipline makes good soldiers. Structure. Following orders. Jake remained silent. Nothing to say. Kralvex stepped closer, towering over the human. Perhaps you need a practical demonstration of the pecking order. What happened next would be reviewed by the Academy Board for weeks. Kralvex struck without warning, a lightning-fast jab with his primary right arm, aimed at Jake's solar plexus. It was a teaching blow, meant to wind the cadet and establish dominance. In Thoraxian culture, such actions were acceptable between superior and subordinate. The punch connected. Jake stumbled back 3 steps, gasping. Pain exploded through his chest. The other cadets winced sympathetically. Everyone had been on the receiving end of Kralvex's lessons. But Jake didn't fall. And he didn't stay bent over. Instead, something ancient stirred in his DNA, millions of years of evolution on a planet where everything was trying to kill you. Where persistence hunting and endurance running had shaped early humans. Where fight-or-flight responses were honed against predators that should have been impossible to defeat. Jake straightened. His eyes locked onto Kralvex. The Thoraxian sergeant suddenly felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, uncertainty. Humans had a peculiar trait that most species found disturbing. When injured, when hurt, when their adrenaline spiked, they didn't become weaker. They became more dangerous. Jake's counterattack was born from 18 years of hockey fights, backyard boxing with his brothers, and that one summer working ranch security where he'd learned that sometimes you had to hit first and apologize later. He didn't go for a wild haymaker. That's what amateurs did. Instead, Jake stepped forward inside Kralvex's reach, close enough that those 4 arms became a liability rather than an advantage. His right fist drove upward in a tight, perfect uppercut that connected with the soft joint where the Thoraxian's mandibles met his throat. Chitinous armor was excellent against slashing and stabbing. But blunt force trauma? Especially delivered by a species that had evolved to throw objects and punches with devastating accuracy. Kralvex's head snapped back. Jake didn't stop. His left hand grabbed the sergeant's secondary arm for leverage while his right elbow smashed into the thorax joint, one of the 3 vulnerable points on a thoraxian's body. Then a knee to the abdomen, right where he'd seen Kralvex flinch during last week's anatomy briefing. The entire sequence took 2.3 seconds. Kralvex collapsed to one knee, gasping, all 4 arms clutching his midsection. The training ground fell silent. Jake stood over his instructor, breathing hard, fists still clenched. For a moment, nobody moved. The other cadets stared in shock. A human, a soft, weak, Deathworlder human, had just dropped a Thoraxian combat veteran. Then Jake extended his hand. "You all right, Sergeant?" Kralvex stared at the offered hand, then at the human's face. There was no malice there. No triumph. Just concern and the residual adrenaline slowly fading from his eyes. The Thoraxian took the hand and pulled himself up. "Impressive, Cadet Morrison," Kralvex said slowly, his mandibles clicking in what might have been respect. "Tell me, how did you know where to strike?" "You flinched last Tuesday during the Valkyrie anatomy demonstration, Sergeant." "Right there." Jake pointed to the thorax joint. "Figured if that spot hurt you just seeing it on a diagram, it might be a weak point." "You were paying attention. You said good soldiers need discipline and structure." Jake finally allowed himself a small smile. "You also said we need to know our enemy's weaknesses." "Sir." Kralvex made a sound that might have been laughter. He turned to address the assembled cadets, his voice carrying across the training ground. "New lesson plan today," he announced. "We're going to learn why you never, ever underestimate a Deathworlder. And why humans don't just survive, they adapt, improvise, and overcome." He looked back at Jake. "Cadet Morrison, you're going to teach hand-to-hand combat next week." "Me, Sergeant?" "You just proved something the Thoraxian Empire took 3 wars to learn, size doesn't matter if you know where to hit." Kralvex clicked his mandibles again. "Besides, I want to make sure nobody else in this unit makes my mistake." As the other cadets gathered around Jake, asking questions about human combat techniques, Kralvex watched with something approaching pride. The galaxy was about to learn what Earth's predators had known for millennia: humans might not be the strongest, fastest, or most armored species. But they were patient, observant, and when pushed, absolutely relentless. And that made them the most dangerous soldiers in the coalition.